Hello everyone, I'm Ray Howell, and I'm standing in the old historic Lexington City Cemetery with my granddaughter, Ella Ray. As you can see, we both have on our Yorktown t-shirts because we have recently visited Yorktown, Virginia, site of a very famous battle of the American Revolution, Ella Ray.
It was the final battle of the Revolution.
Yes, it was, when General Cornwallis surrendered to General George Washington.
But gee, Daddy, if that was the last battle, what was the first battle?
Ella Ray, that is a great question. The first battle of the American Revolution starts this way. Now listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. It was April the 18th, 1775, and the British, under the leadership of General Thomas Gage, had become concerned about the movement of the Patriots. In fact, General Gage had received word from London that he needed to stop this Patriot movement because the tensions had been building for some time. Now, the British had learned that the Patriots had a large supply of guns and ammunition in the little town of Concord, Massachusetts. They were also after two of the leaders of the Patriot movement, Samuel Adams and John Hancock. And so the British decided that they would go on a stealth mission, that under the cover of darkness they would march to Concord and surprise the Patriots. But what they didn't know was the Patriots had already learned about this mission, and Paul Revere, when they crossed the Charles River, started on his famous ride, and he alerted all of the settlers that the British were coming. Now, as the British made their way through the darkness, there was something that they greatly underestimated. There was something that they never really understood. And that was this notion of freedom and independence, and just how important that was to the Patriots. Standing here in the middle of the old Lexington City Cemetery reminds me that this land on which I'm standing at one time was British land. In fact, Ella Ray, where you live, that land belonged to the King of England. But in 1762, the King of England gave a very generous grant of 520 acres to Hugh McCrary, which includes where you live over on 4th Avenue. Lexington City Cemetery today was part of that original land grant. The settlers who lived here in the 1760s faced many challenges, but one of the greatest challenges was the excessive taxation by the British. And then a new colonial governor came named William Tryon, who decided that he was going to build an opulent palace in the capital of New Bern. How would he pay for this palace? With more taxes, of course. And that's when the settlers in this area said, enough is enough. They started a movement that we call the regulator movement. And one of the largest groups of regulators was located just a few miles away in the Jersey settlement, led by one Benjamin Merrill. Well, Governor Tryon put a stop to the regulator movement in the very bloody Battle of Alamance, and he captured Benjamin Merrill. He was taken to Hillsborough, and he was tried and convicted of treason. And on June the 19th, 1771, he was executed by hanging in Hillsborough. All of the other regulators were forced to sign an oath of loyalty to the crown. The message was crystal clear: be loyal to the British or else. But yet, the memory of Benjamin Merrill continued, and the dream of freedom remained in this area. And by the way, if you go to Conrad and Hinkle, go to that area of the square and you will find a memorial for Benjamin Merrill. Let's go back to the night of April the 18th, 1775. The British were not aware that Paul Revere and the others had warned the settlers that the British were indeed coming. In fact, we feel now that Samuel Adams and John Hancock actually were in Lexington when the night started, but they were able to escape. Now, the British arrived on the town green of Lexington about 5 o'clock in the morning. They didn't expect any resistance. They planned to quietly make their way through, not disturbing the residents, because their mission was the ammunition that was stored at Concord. Little did they know that when Paul Revere had warned the colonists that the British were coming, that Captain John Parker had his group of militia gathered at the local tavern. And it is said that John Parker looked at his men and said, "Men, stand your ground. Do not fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to start a war, let it begin here." 700 British, 77 militia. The British immediately ordered the militia to stand down. And when they refused, what happened next? Well, no one really knows who fired the shot, whether it was the British, whether it was the militia. But when the smoke cleared, 8 brave patriots were dead. And the shot heard round the world had been fired. Now, after the events on April the 19th at Lexington and Concord, express riders made their way to Philadelphia, where the Continental Congress had convened, to let them know of the events of those epic battles. The Congress decided that the people who lived here in North Carolina, in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, that they needed to know about what had happened up north. And the story is, maybe 3 to 6 weeks later, there was a man on horseback that made his way across Abbott's Creek, and he came up to the Pleasant Ridge, and he found an inn that was located somewhere around where the Davidson County Public Library in Lexington is located today. He shared with the people, Hugh McCrary and others who lived here, about what had happened up north. My guess is he probably said, "Oh, by the way, where am I? What's the name of this settlement?" Ella Ray? They didn't have a name. But after this man left, they discussed the events, and they made a bold and courageous decision. They decided that they would name this little settlement Lexington in honor and in memory of those brave patriots who had stood up to the British. We can say the shot heard round the world landed here first. As we get ready to celebrate the 4th of July, I think those of us who live in Lexington and Davidson County can be so proud of that great heritage. Now think about this. The Declaration of Independence did not happen until a year later. The people remembered what the British had done to Benjamin Merrill and had made everybody sign an oath of loyalty to the crown. There were people who lived around here who were loyalists, who were faithful to the British, but even so, they decided by naming this hamlet Lexington to take up the patriot cause. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to visit Lexington, Virginia. It's a beautiful city, full of history, and you can take a carriage ride around Lexington, and they will tell you all about their history. Well, I got in the carriage, and a very enthusiastic tour guide welcomed us to Lexington, home of Washington and Lee University, and she said, "We were named in 1778 after the Battle of Lexington in Massachusetts. We were the first town named Lexington in memory of that great battle." And I listened to that, and I said, "Now, tell me again, what year were you named?" And she said 1778. And I said, "So about 3 years after the battle?" She said, "Yes." And I said, "I'm from Lexington, North Carolina. And we also were named after that famous battle in Massachusetts." And she said, "Oh, well, when were you named?" I said, 3 to 6 weeks after the battle. Well, whether we were the first Lexington or not is not that important. But what is important is the shot heard round the world landed here. And the spirit of freedom and independence was alive and well in 1775. And every time we remember the name of our city, let us remember that the foundation of that name is grounded in the freedom and independence that we celebrate and we hold so dear. So Ella Ray, Yorktown was considered the final battle of the Revolution, but it all started in April of 1775, and it landed here where we are standing today. Thank you for joining us, and I hope and pray you'll have a wonderful Independence Day and remember our great heritage.